The hollow stone glowed, 3 lines carved into ancient rock filled with pale fire, and the ceremonial hall of Moonspire fell into a silence so absolute that even the candle flames seemed to stop breathing. Leora Ashvane stood at the center of it all, with her bare palm pressed against stone that should have been cold, but was not. It was warm. It was alive. It was answering her in a language older than words, older than courts, older than the laws they used to break women who dared to want more than what they were given. 3 pulses moved through her bones. Not sound, not thought. Sensation. Pure, animal, undeniable. The first was warmth. The kind that curls around you in the dark when you have forgotten what safety feels like. The second was hunger. Not for food, for belonging. For the right to exist without apology. The third was protection. Fierce and small and impossibly tender, like something had already chosen her before she had the chance to choose herself. Leora's knees threatened to buckle. Her other hand flew to her belly on reflex, as if she could hold the sensation in place, keep it from slipping through her fingers the way everything else had slipped tonight. Behind her, the court of Moonspire stood frozen in their half-circle of judgment. The stained glass windows held their breath. The moon incense clung to every throat like a hand that would not let go. And Leora whispered so softly it was almost only for herself, "The moon heard you." 12 hours earlier, she had still believed she was empty. The morning before the ceremony, Moonspire smelled like cold stone and obligation. Leora moved through the servant corridors the way she always did, quietly, carefully, as if the castle might remember she existed and decide to push her out. Her dress for the evening was already laid across the bed in her chamber. White. Not the romantic kind. The kind that was not chosen so much as assigned. She turned a corner near the kitchen passage and stopped. A girl knelt on the flagstones. Young, 15 at most, with red eyes and a mark blooming across her left cheek that was still fresh enough to shine. Her name was Marin. She worked the upper floors, pressing linens, carrying trays, staying invisible the way the castle required of girls who had no family name to protect them. Standing above her was Seraphine Calloway. Seraphine's hand was still raised, fingers curled with the casual authority of someone who understood that cruelty required no justification when directed downward. Her silver gown caught the corridor light, and her face held the kind of beauty that had been sharpened at every edge until softness became a foreign language. "You wrinkled the ceremonial silk," Seraphine said, her voice sweet in the way poison is sweet when it wants you to swallow before you notice. "Do you understand what tonight means? Do you understand that your carelessness reflects on this court?" Marin's shoulders shook, but no sound came out. She had already learned the lesson the castle taught every girl without power. Cry quietly. Cry later. Cry where no one can use it against you. Leora stepped forward. "Lady Seraphine," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The silk will press again. The girl will not bruise again as easily." Seraphine's gaze slid to Leora with the slow precision of someone deciding whether a fly was worth swatting. "Ah, the Luna candidate. Shouldn't you be preparing for your verification tonight? I hear the odds are not in your favor." The words landed exactly where they were aimed. Leora felt the sting bloom behind her ribs, but she held Seraphine's gaze the way you hold a blade, steady, aware of the edge, refusing to flinch. "I am preparing," Leora replied, "for everything." Seraphine's lips curved, not a smile, a measurement. Then she turned and walked away, heels sharp on stone, already discarding the moment like tissue paper. Leora knelt beside Maren. The girl's cheek was hot under Leora's fingertips, already swelling. Leora pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, embroidered with small white flowers. She had stitched herself during long nights when sleep refused to come. "Here," Leora murmured, pressing the cloth gently against Maren's skin. "Keep it, and remember, do not let them see you cry. Your tears belong to you, not to them." Maren's fingers closed around the handkerchief as if it were something holy. Her eyes lifted to Leora's face, and in that look was something Leora would not fully understand until much later. It was not gratitude. It was recognition. The recognition of one invisible woman by another. Leora rose and continued down the corridor, and she did not know that the handkerchief she had just given away would find its way back to her on the worst night of her life, clutched in the hands of a girl who remembered kindness the way the body remembers warmth. That evening, the balcony air tasted like the edge of a storm. Kale Drakemere stood with his hands on the railing, broad shoulders squared against the wind, jaw set in that way he had of making granite look soft by comparison. He was still wearing his council clothes, dark fabric pulled tight across his chest, and his scent carried on the breeze to where Leora stood in the doorway. Storm and warmth. That was always how he smelled to her. Like weather that could destroy you, and a hearth that would keep you alive through the night. The combination had undone her from the very first time she stood close enough to breathe him in, and it undid her now. "You are thinking too loudly," Leora said from the threshold. Kale turned. His eyes found her, and something behind them shifted, a softening that he allowed only when no one else was watching. He extended his hand, palm up, fingers open, an offering rather than a command. She crossed to him, took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with the careful pressure of a man who understood that holding too tightly was its own kind of losing. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, and his voice was rougher than usual, scraped raw by something he was not saying. "You are the one I chose. You are the one I will always choose." Leora studied his face. The torchlight from the hall behind them carved shadows beneath his cheekbones, and his eyes held that storm-dark depth that she had learned to read the way sailors read the sky. But tonight there was something else in them, a flicker she could not name, a heaviness that did not belong to a man who was simply nervous about a ceremony. "Kale," she whispered, "what are you not telling me?" His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. The touch was deliberate, tender. The kind of touch a man offers when he is memorizing someone. "Nothing that changes what I feel," he said. It was not a lie, but it was not the truth either. And Leora would not understand that distinction until it shattered her in front of 300 witnesses. What she did not see, what she could not have seen, was the meeting that had taken place 1 hour before in the Grand Matron's private chamber. Kale Drakemere stood across from Arevia with his hands behind his back and murder in his restraint. The Grand Matron sat behind her desk like a woman who had been sitting behind desks her entire life and understood that desks were just polite versions of walls. "If you do not release her yourself," Arevia said, her voice smooth as ceremonial silk, "I will invoke the binding oath. She will belong to the court, not to you, not to herself. She will serve the throne as a ward of Moonspire until a suitable match is arranged. You know what that means, Your Majesty. She becomes property wrapped in the language of protection." Kale's jaw worked once, twice. The muscles in his neck tightened until the tendons stood like cables. "You would cage her," he said. "I would preserve order," Erevia corrected, folding her hands with the serenity of someone who had confused control with holiness so long ago she could no longer tell the difference. A Luna who fails verification is a liability. An unbound liability is a threat. The binding oath removes the threat while maintaining appearances. "Surely you understand appearances, Your Majesty." Kyle understood. That was the problem. He understood exactly how the court would dress the cage in ceremony and call it kindness. He understood that Leora would smile through it because Leora always smiled through pain. And that smile would slowly become the only expression she had left. He had one option that left her free. One option that would break her heart, but not her will. "I will release her," Kyle said, and every word tasted like swallowing a blade. Under the hollow moon accord. Publicly. Before the court. Erevia's lips curved. Satisfaction disguised as solemnity. "A wise decision." Kale turned toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "If I ever discover that you manipulated this outcome beyond what you have admitted tonight," he said without turning, "I will dismantle your office stone by stone." Erevia's smile held. "Good night, Your Majesty." He left, and in the silence after his footsteps faded, Erevia opened a drawer and removed a small glass vial. The liquid inside was colorless, odorless, designed to dull the reaction of moon water to a living bond. She had used it before. She would use it tonight. And no one, not the king, not the candidate, not the moon itself, would be able to prove that the emptiness they witnessed was manufactured rather than real. The ceremony began at moonrise. The hall of Moonspire filled with bodies and silence, and the thick, sacred scent of moon incense that clung to everything it touched. 300 courtiers arranged themselves in a perfect half-circle around the dais, their faces composed into expressions of ritual concern that looked rehearsed because they were. Leora stood at the center where the stone was lighter, scrubbed pale by 100 ceremonies before hers. Silk gloves covered her palms, which were damp. Her white dress caught the candlelight and made her feel like a target rather than a bride. Grand Matron Erevia lifted the silver bowl of moon water. Her voice carried with the ease of someone who had never once doubted she would be heard. "Leora Ashvine of the Ashford line, you stand before the court under the hollow moon accord. The bond between Luna candidate and Alpha King is affirmed by scent, by instinct, and by the blessing of continuation." Continuation. The word landed in Leora's chest with the familiar cruelty of an old wound reopened. She had heard it in whispers, in sympathetic sighs, in the way people said, "You are so kind," as if kindness was what you were allowed to be when you were not anything else. Erevia dipped her fingers into the bowl and touched Leora's wrist. The water was cold enough to bite, and for a second Leora's skin prickled as if her body wanted to flinch away from the judgment of strangers, but she stayed still. She always stayed still. "By the moon," Erevia intoned, "show us what is hidden." The moon water sat on Leora's skin. It did not glow. It did not shimmer. It did nothing at all. It simply remained there, dull, ordinary, unimpressed, like a mirror reflecting back exactly what the court expected to see. The silence stretched. Thin. Bright. Humiliating. "She is empty," someone breathed, and the words floated through the hall like weather. Leora's cheeks burned so fast it felt like being caught under a spotlight. Her throat closed, not from tears. She would not give them tears. From the simple, brutal effort of keeping her dignity upright when it wanted to crawl under a bench and disappear. Thessaly Briarwick, standing at Leora's side with her braid perfect and her expression promising violence, sliced through the murmur with a voice sweet enough to cut glass. Well, the Moonspire court certainly knows how to make a woman feel welcome. Is there a snack table after the public humiliation, or is that a premium package? Heads turned, scandalized. Erevia's gaze sharpened. Kale's eyes flicked to Thessaly with the expression of a man who was simultaneously grateful and terrified. Then Kale spoke, and the hall leaned in. Because when a king speaks after silence, the world rearranges itself around his voice. I chose you, he said quietly, looking down at Leora. I would choose you again. Her breath caught. Not because of romance, because of timing, because those words were exactly what she needed, delivered at the exact moment they would hurt the most. Then his shoulders squared. His gaze lifted past Leora to the court. His voice became public, became law. Under the hollow moon accord, a Luna must carry the crown's future. Leora Ashvon, you have been tested. A pause that felt like the edge of a cliff. I release you from claim, from ceremony, from the throne. The words did not echo. They sank into the stone floor and into Leora's body simultaneously, and she felt the ground tilt just slightly beneath her feet, while everyone else in the room seemed to know how to keep their balance. Heat rushed to her face, then drained. Her skin felt too tight, too exposed, too seen and too invisible at the same time. Thessaly stepped forward, voice bright with venom. Just for the record, I have been in kitchens with less judgment and better manners. Leora could not speak. If she opened her mouth, something inside her would break and tumble out across the pale stone for everyone to examine. So she did the only thing she could. She turned. Her train whispered over the floor as she walked. Every step a small act of survival. Shoulders straight, chin up, body a lie because her heart was too loud. Halfway down the aisle, she felt it. Not a touch. A pull. As if the moon incense had changed into something older, deeper, like winter air right before snow. The hollow stone waited at the side of the hall. Ancient. Ignored. 3 shallow grooves carved into its surface like claw marks left by something that wanted to be remembered. Thessaly hissed behind her. Leora, no. That thing is basically a supernatural complaint box. Leora's fingers trembled as she reached out. The court's murmur shifted to confusion. A guard near the dais stepped forward, hand raised to stop her. Lady Ashvane, you are to return to your quarters for protective custody by order of the Grand Ma. Leora pulled her wrist free before he could finish closing his grip. She turned her gaze on him, and something in her eyes, something she did not know she owned, made him stop. I am not a prisoner, she said, and her voice came out low and certain in a way that surprised her more than anyone. I am the woman the moon just answered. Touch me again and find out what that means. The guard stepped back. Not because Leora was threatening, because the hollow stone behind her had begun to hum, and no one in that hall knew what the old laws permitted when they woke up. Leora placed her palm against the cold surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the hollow stone warmed, not like sunlight, like breath. A rush of sensation hit her so hard, her vision blurred. The phantom weight of 3 small bodies curled close, the instinct to shelter, the sharp sweetness of milk scent that had never existed in her life until this exact second. Her hand flew to her belly. The stone pulsed, once, twice, 3 times, steady as a drumline inside her bones. Behind her, 300 courtiers stopped breathing. Erivia's voice cracked across the hall. "Remove your hand." Leora could not, because the stone was not just warm now. It was alive with a triple beat that felt like a future tapping on the inside of the present. Kale stared at her hand on the stone as if he had just watched the rules of his world bend without asking permission. His voice came out rough. "Leora." She turned her head, met his eyes, and in the center of her chest, where shame had been sitting like a stone, something cracked open. Not hope, not yet. Something wilder, something that did not ask for approval. Leora whispered, "The moon heard you." The hollow stone flared with pale light, 3 grooves filled with quiet fire, and the hall of Moonspire fell into the kind of silence that occurs when a court, for the first time in centuries, realizes it has just witnessed the beginning of a story it cannot control. Then the great doors were behind her, and the corridor air hit her face like mercy. Thessaly appeared at her side, moving fast in a way that did not match her elegant braid. "All right," she breathed. "We can panic with dignity now." Leora's legs carried her on instinct through narrow corridors, past servant passages and forgotten arches. Thessaly's keys clinked at her belt like small metal reassurances. "If anyone asks," Thessaly murmured, "we are not fleeing. We are aggressively relocating." In a storage room that smelled of dried flowers and clean paper, Thessaly pulled an old book from a high shelf, gray leather binding, worn at the edges. She found the page and read aloud, voice low. "When a crowned alpha rejects a bound Luna for perceived emptiness, and the rejection is spoken before witness and moon, the moon may answer. The rejected may be marked by the hollow stone and granted the return." Leora's skin prickled. The return. Thessaly traced the passage further. Granted in the form of 3 moonwhelps, spirit-bound wolfkin, loyal to the rejected. And with the return, the moon may send a crown scale. Dragon bonded to the rightful seat of the throne. Leora's hand pressed against her belly. 3 pulses answered, faint, unmistakable, like sparks shifting closer to the warmth of her palm. Thessaly turned the page, and her expression changed. "There is a condition," she said carefully. "The wolfkin must touch Moonspire ground before they reach maturity. If they do not, the court has the right to nullify the return permanently." She looked up. "You have 9 months, Leora. 9 months to decide whether you come back and claim what is yours, or let them erase you." Leora stared at the book, at Thessaly, at her own hands, bare now, the gloves abandoned somewhere on the pale stone floor of the hall where her old life had ended. "Pack supplies," Leora said quietly. Thessaly was already reaching for the cabinet. "I started before you asked." The iron gate at Moonspire's outer wall opened with a reluctant sigh. The forest beyond was not darkness. It was layers, tree trunks like pillars, underbrush like a quiet tide, moonlight in thin silver threads between branches. Leora stepped through, and something changed. Not in the world, in her. The air smelled older, wilder, sharp with pine and damp earth, and beneath it, subtle, a note of something scaled and mineral, like warm stone after sunlight. Thessaly inhaled beside her. Her eyes narrowed. "Either destiny is showing off," she murmured, "or something very ancient has opinions." The gate clicked shut behind them. The sound landed like a period at the end of a life Leora was no longer living. And deep inside Moonspire, muffled by stone and ceremony and the heavy scent of moon incense. A low sound rolled through the castle walls. Not a roar, not a groan. Something between. The exhale of a creature that had been sleeping for a very long time and had just decided, with absolute certainty, that it was time to wake up. In the forest, Leora pressed her palm to her belly. 3 pulses answered like a promise she did not yet understand, and the night opened its arms, wild and ancient and patient, and waited for her to walk in. The first night in the hollow wood tasted like freedom and terror in equal measure. Leora did not sleep so much as drift between awareness and exhaustion, her back pressed against a moss-covered boulder that Thessaly had declared structurally acceptable after kicking it twice with her boot. The cloak beneath her was thin. The cold was not. And every sound the forest made registered inside Leora's body like a language she was only beginning to learn. A branch cracking somewhere to the east. An owl calling low and deliberate, as if it had something to report. The wind shifting through pine needles with a whisper that sounded almost like a name. And beneath all of it, steady as breathing, 3 pulses inside her chest that had not stopped since the hollow stone first answered her touch. Thessaly sat against a neighboring tree with her satchel across her knees, cataloging supplies with the focused calm of a woman who had decided that the universe could fall apart around her as long as her inventory remained organized. Dried meat, herbs in waxed cloth, a water skin, 3 tinctures wrapped in soft leather, a flint, a small tin cup. "All right," Thessaly murmured, not looking up. "Here is where we stand. I have enough provisions for approximately 4 days if we eat like reasonable adults, and approximately 2 days if we eat like people who have just fled a castle on an empty stomach." Leora's mouth twitched despite herself. "Which option are we choosing?" "The one where I pretend I am not starving and you pretend you are not terrified, and we both agree not to discuss it until morning." Thessaly paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, "So the usual, then." Leora exhaled slowly. The forest air filled her lungs, clean and sharp, utterly free of moon incense. She had not realized how heavily that scent had been sitting in her chest until it was gone. Its absence felt like the first full breath she had taken in months. Her hand drifted to her belly. 3 pulses answered. Different this time. Quieter. Less urgent. The sensation of settling rather than surging, as if whatever lived inside that bond had decided the running was over for now and rest was permitted. Leora closed her eyes and let the forest hold her weight. She woke to pale ribbons of light threading through branches and the sound of Thessaly muttering something uncomplimentary about pine cones. Morning in the hollow wood did not arrive with drama. It arrived carefully, turning frost into glitter, making the air look dusted with silver. Leora sat up slowly. Her body ached in ways that had nothing to do with the ground beneath her, and everything to do with the night before. With the hall, the white dress, the bowl of water that refused to glow, and the man who had broken her heart in public while whispering love in private. She pushed the memory down. Not away. Down. Into the place where she would deal with it later, when her hands were not shaking and the forest was not listening. 3 pulses stirred inside her. Brighter now. Distinct. The first was restless. Eager. It moved through her like the urge to run before knowing the direction. The second was measured. Cool. It pressed against her awareness with the patient weight of something that wanted to understand before it moved. The third was mischievous. Sharp and warm and slightly ridiculous, like a laugh that arrived at exactly the wrong moment. They were not thoughts. They were not voices. They were weather patterns translated into instinct, and Leora felt each one as clearly as she felt the cold on her skin. "They are here," she whispered. Thessaly looked up from the small fire she was coaxing into existence. "I beg your pardon?" "The wolfkin," Leora breathed, and her hand pressed against her belly hard enough to feel the drumbeat through fabric and flesh. "They are close." Thessaly stared at her for a long second. Then she set the flint down with deliberate care and said, "All right, I am going to remain very calm about this, because one of us needs to, and you are clearly not available for that role right now." The forest went quiet, not the peaceful quiet of an empty place, the alert quiet of a place that was holding still because something was about to happen. Every bird stopped. Every breeze paused. Even the frost seemed to hold its crystals in place, as if the morning itself had drawn a breath and forgotten to release it. Leora rose to her feet. Her body moved before her mind caught up, pulled by an instinct she had no name for, but could not ignore. She turned toward a gap between two ancient pines, where the moonlight from last night still seemed to linger, pale and heavy, almost liquid, as if the darkness had left something behind when it retreated. The air inside that gap shimmered, and then three shapes pushed through. Not like humans stepping through a doorway, like wolves being poured into the world. They were small, pup-sized, but unmistakably wolfkin. Their bodies were compact and balanced, with paws too large for their frames in that endearing animal way that promised clumsy enthusiasm now and devastating grace later. Their fur caught what little light the canopy allowed, silver-edged, moon-drawn, as if the night itself had sketched them with a careful hand. The first one bounded forward immediately, nose to the ground, then up, then sideways, taking in everything with a hunger for information that bordered on obsession. It circled Leora's boots and pressed its head against her shin, as if tagging her with a scent it could not actually produce yet, claiming her through the only language it knew: contact, proximity, mine. A wave of sensation hit Leora so hard her knees buckled. Warmth, belonging, the immediate certainty of safe and home and never letting go. She gasped, and the sound that came out of her was not dignified. It was raw and small and surprised, the sound of a woman who had been told she was empty, discovering that she was full. "Ember," Leora whispered, and she did not know where the name came from, but she knew it was right, the same way she knew how to breathe. The pup's tail wagged so fast its entire body vibrated. The second one emerged more slowly. It paused at the edge of the moonlit patch, ears flicking, gaze scanning the trees, and then the two women, and then the trees again. Not afraid. Measuring. Its impression flooded into Leora like cold water poured with care. Is this place secure? Is she secure? Where are the exits? What moves in the shadows? Shade, Leora breathed, and the name settled into the bond like a key turning in a lock. Shade's ear flicked once in acknowledgement. Then it padded forward and positioned itself near Leora's left ankle, close enough to touch, far enough to watch, already standing guard over a territory it had claimed in the space of a single breath. The third one trotted out with a swagger that did not match its size. It surveyed the clearing as if inspecting a property it was considering purchasing, found Thessaly's boots, and promptly attempted to untie one of them with its teeth. Thessaly stared down at it with an expression of genuine betrayal. "Absolutely not," she said. "I do not care what celestial claw you crawled out of. You are not eating my footwear." The pup sneezed, tiny, offended. Then it tried again. Leora's laugh broke out of her before she could stop it. Quiet and surprised and aching in the best possible way, the sound of something cracking open inside her that had been sealed shut for months. "Wisp," she said, and the name arrived with a burst of sensation through the bond. Mischief, daring, the absolute refusal to take anything seriously, including and especially the rules. Thessaly pointed at Wisp with one finger. "You and I are going to have a very long conversation about boundaries." Wisp sat down, looked directly at Thessaly, and sneezed again. Leora crouched slowly, letting all three approach at their own pace. Ember leaned into her immediately, pressing its small, warm body against her knees with a devotion that felt older than the morning. Shade stayed close, but watchful, eyes tracking the tree line even as its shoulder rested against Leora's calf. Wisp abandoned Thessaly's boots and sniffed Leora's hair with the bold intimacy of a creature that had decided personal space was a concept invented by cowards. She let them smell her without forcing contact, and the impressions that flowed through the bond brought tears to her eyes that she did not try to stop. Milk, sweet hunger, the desire to curl up somewhere warm, the primal satisfaction of being near her. Not her specifically, not her name or her face or her history, but her. The center, the home, the one they had chosen before they had eyes to see or noses to scent. The part of her that the court had labeled empty was being claimed by instinct so pure it did not require a ceremony. Thessaly crouched beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and for once, the apothecary had nothing sharp to say. She simply watched, and when Leora glanced at her, Thessaly's eyes were bright in a way she would deny later with her entire reputation. "All right," Thessaly said after a moment, clearing her throat with exaggerated composure. "3 wolfkin, spirit-bound, moonborn, currently attempting to eat my shoelace collection." She nodded once, businesslike. "What is next on the destiny agenda?" They moved deeper into the Hollowwood that day, following a faint trail that Thessaly seemed to know by memory. The trees grew closer. The canopy thickened. Moonlight thinned into stripes that fell across the forest floor like bars on a cage made of silver. Leora walked with Ember at her heels and Shade at her left flank and Wisp somewhere ahead, darting between ferns with the energy of a creature that believed sticks were prey and shadows were personal enemies to be vanquished. The bond hummed constantly now, not loudly, not intrusively, more like a second pulse running beneath her own heartbeat, feeding her information she had never known she needed. Ember's hunger arrived as a tugging sensation near her stomach. Shade's alertness sat cool and watchful at the base of her spine. Wisp's joy burst through in sparks that made Leora's mouth twitch at random moments, as if the pup's delight was contagious across the invisible thread between them. And then the air changed, warmer, subtler. A scent like heated stone and rain filled caves curled around them. And Thessaly stopped so abruptly, Leora almost walked into her back. "What?" Leora whispered. Thessaly's eyes lifted. Leora followed her gaze. On a low moss-covered boulder just off the path sat a creature shaped like myth. Not enormous. Not yet. But unmistakably draconic. Sleek body folded into patience. Wings tucked along its flanks like arguments held in reserve. Scales the color of deep dusk with pale edges that caught the filtered light and turned it into something that looked like moonlit glass. Its eyes were bright and ancient, and watching Leora with the calm, immovable attention of something that had decided what mattered long before she arrived and was simply waiting for reality to catch up. The wolfkin pressed closer to Leora's legs, not fearful, alert. Shade's impression flooded in. Cool caution poured steadily into Leora's awareness. Ember vibrated with restless curiosity, the desire to approach and investigate warring with the instinct to stay near pack. Wisp sneezed at it, because of course Wisp sneezed at a dragon. Thessaly whispered with a reverence that sounded like it hurt her to produce. Well, there it is. Leora took one careful step forward. Her hand lifted, not demanding, just offering, and the dragon leaned forward and pressed its forehead, smooth scales cool at first, against her palm. The world tilted. Sensation poured into Leora so fast she swayed. Stone corridors, a throne carved with crescent motifs. The weight of responsibility so heavy it had a physical shape, pressing down on shoulders that were expected to carry it without complaint. And then something else. A presence in the castle. Sharp and hungry in the way ambition smells when it has stopped pretending to be patience. Sweet perfume in a private chamber. A sealed letter. Moon water poured into a bowl with something added. Something that dulled. Something that muted. Something that could make a living bond look like nothing. Leora's fingers curled against the dragon's scales. Her stomach turned. Not because she wanted revenge, because she had been made smaller on purpose, because the emptiness they named in that hall had been manufactured, and she had believed it. She had stood there in white silk and believed she was defective. Leora. Thessaly's voice, soft now, grounding. Leora blinked, pulling herself back into the clearing. It is showing me things, she whispered. Thessaly stared at the dragon, then at Leora, then sighed as if the universe had personally submitted an invoice she had no intention of paying. Of course it is, because why would the moon send you a normal sign like a nice breeze and a sense of closure? The dragon withdrew its head slightly, then slowly, deliberately, it lowered itself to the ground at Leora's feet, folded its wings, settled with absolute certainty, as if this was where it belonged and had always belonged, and the rest of the world was simply late to the understanding. Eventide, Leora murmured, and the name rose from somewhere deep inside the bond, from the place where truth lived before language reached it. The dragon exhaled softly. Acceptance. The wolfkin approached in a loose triangle. Ember first, sniffing the dragon's scales with the seriousness of an animal evaluating a new member of pack territory. Satisfied. A burst of approval through the bond. Wisp tried to step on Eventide's tail and then leapt away as if it had accomplished something heroic. Shade touched the dragon's shoulder once, held still for a breath, then withdrew. Decision made. The bond pulsed with warmth. Hours. Leora pressed her hand to her chest because the sensation threatened to overflow, and she was afraid that if she let it, she would collapse right here in the moss and never get up. Not from weakness, from the sheer, staggering weight of being chosen by creatures that did not care about ceremonies or court opinions or the word empty. They cared about truth, and they had found it in her. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months. And the Hollowwood became a world that Leora did not know she needed until she was living inside it. She learned to feed the wolfkin by hand, tearing dried meat into portions that matched their growing appetites. Ember always ate first and fastest, teeth small and sharp and efficient, satisfaction flooding the bond like sunlight through a window. Shade ate facing outward, guarding even while chewing, alert even while content. Wisp took its portion and tried to bury it under Leora's cloak every single time, pawing at fabric as if it were soil, and every single time Thessaly stared with the expression of a woman whose patience was being tested by the divine. Thessaly taught Leora the names of plants, which roots stopped bleeding, which bark brewed into tea that eased nausea, which flowers, crushed between fingers, could clear a foggy head or calm a racing heart. Leora absorbed it all with a focus that surprised them both, as if her mind had been starving for something practical and real and completely unconnected to politics. The bond deepened. It was not telepathy. It would never be language. But the impressions grew sharper, more detailed, more layered. Hunger was no longer a single sensation. It was Ember's urgent, joyful hunger that tasted like excitement. It was Shade's quiet hunger that carried the flavor of duty, the need to be strong enough to protect. It was Wisp's hunger that arrived wrapped in playfulness, as if even eating was a game. And Leora began to feel something she had not felt inside the walls of Moonspire. Not happiness, which was too simple a word. Wholeness. The sense that the pieces of herself that the court had tried to label as defective were, in fact, exactly what her pack required. Eventide grew, not dramatically. Slowly, the way mountains grow, imperceptibly, until one morning you realize the shadow is larger than it was. The dragon remained at the edges of their camp, guardian and witness, lifting its head when Leora passed and settling again when she was safe. Its eyes held that ancient, steady pressure. Truth. Seat. Return. A verdict that did not fade with time, but deepened, pressing into Leora's bones like a crown she had not yet agreed to wear. In Moonspire, Kale Drakemere was dismantling himself quietly. He stood in the empty ceremonial hall at midnight, staring at the pale stone where Leora had stood, and he could still smell her. Not literally. Memory had its own scent, and it was crueler than any perfume, because it never faded when you needed it to. He had gone through Arevia's private chambers 3 days after the ceremony, carefully, methodically, the way a man searches when he already knows what he will find and is simply collecting evidence for the trial he is building inside his own chest. The vial was in the second drawer. Small. Glass. The liquid inside so clear it could have been water, except that water did not carry the faint chemical undertone of betrayal. Kale held it up to the candlelight and felt something inside him go very still. She had tampered with the verification. The emptiness was a lie. He placed the vial back exactly where he found it, not because he was finished with it, but because he was not ready yet. Because confronting Arevia without Leora meant the Grand Matron would simply rewrite the narrative, and the court would believe her, because courts always believed the person standing closest to the throne. Seraphine arrived the next week, polished, silver, smiling with the precision of a woman who understood that smiles were currency and she intended to spend lavishly. "Your Majesty," she said, dipping into a curtsy that lasted exactly long enough to be noticed, but not long enough to be mocked. "The court has asked me to serve as provisional Luna until the matter of the hollow stone is clarified." Kale looked at her, not through her, at her, and what he saw was a woman wrapped so tightly in ambition that the person underneath had been compressed into something unrecognizable. "Do not mistake your presence for a welcome," he said. Seraphine's smile held, but the effort of holding it cost her something she would not admit to anyone. In her private chamber that evening, she sat before her mirror and watched her own reflection with the kind of attention usually reserved for enemies. Her mother's face looked back at her, the same cheekbones, the same careful mouth, the same desperate hunger disguised as poise. Her mother, who had also worn white once, who had also stood in a ceremonial hall and been found insufficient, who had spent the rest of her life in a small room at the edge of a territory that had forgotten her name. Seraphine pressed her palms flat against the vanity until her knuckles whitened. She knew about the moon water. She had known before the ceremony. And she had said nothing, because saying something meant surrendering the only door that had ever opened for her, and she was not her mother. She would not die quietly in a forgotten room. She would survive, whatever that cost. Whoever that cost. Kale came to the Hollowwood on a morning when the mist hung so low it erased the line between forest and sky. He arrived the way Leora had imagined he might, though she had forbidden herself from imagining it. Alone, no crown, no guards. Hands visible and empty at his sides. His cloak was plain, his hair disordered by wind, and his scent reached her before his voice did. Storm and warmth, tangled together, the combination that had always made her chest tighten with something she refused to name. The wolfkin reacted first. Ember bounded forward with the confidence of a creature that had already decided Kale was fascinating and worth investigating at maximum speed. It ran straight to his boots and inhaled with the intensity of an animal collecting entire truths through scent alone. The bond flooded Leora with impressions. Curiosity bright as a spark, excitement warm as milk, and a sharp note of mine that was not possessive in the human way, but was simply pack instinct searching for where belonging lived. Shade stayed at Leora's side, eyes narrowed, posture calm but ready. Wisp sat down, looked at Kale, and gave a tiny disdainful huff. Thessaly leaned toward Leora. "Oh, that one is mine. I am adopting it emotionally." Kale stopped well short of Leora, as if he had drawn an invisible line on the ground and refused to cross it without her permission. His eyes held hers, and the regret in them was not performed. It was lived in. It had taken up residence in his face and changed the way his mouth sat and the way his shoulders carried weight. "I did not come to take you back," he said. "Then why are you here?" "Because I could not breathe." His gaze flicked to Eventide, visible through the trees, and the words caught. "And because the hollow stone changed everything I thought I understood." He told her about Arivia's threat, the binding oath, the choice between breaking Leora's heart and watching the court break her will. He told her without justification, without asking for forgiveness, without the careful architecture of excuses that powerful men construct when they need their decisions to look noble. Leora listened. Her jaw was tight, her fingers curled at her sides. The bond pulsed with 3 different flavors of tension: Ember's restless need to move, Shade's cool assessment, Wisp's defiant refusal to be impressed. "You do not get to decide what I deserve," Leora said quietly. "Not anymore." Kyle nodded once. "You are right." The simplicity of his agreement hit her harder than any argument, because arguments she could fight. Agreement left her with nothing to push against, and the anger she had been carrying like armor suddenly had nowhere to land. They did not touch. They did not bridge the distance between them. But something in the air shifted, subtle as a change in wind direction, and when Ember circled back to Leora's side and leaned against her knee, The pup's impression carried something that had not been there before. Pack, larger now, still forming. For a handful of hours, the clearing felt almost safe. Leora sat against a tree with wolfkin piled against her legs. Kale sat across from her, giving her space, his presence warm at the edge of her awareness. Thessaly boiled tea and pretended she was not watching them both with the sharp attention of a woman who had opinions she was generously choosing not to voice. Wind moved through Leora's hair, and she caught Kale looking at her with an expression that made her look away. Not because she did not want to see it, because she did, and wanting it still felt dangerous. Then a figure appeared between the trees, an attendant in pale ceremonial cloth, hands folded, face blank with the kind of emptiness that came from years of obedience. She carried a sealed scroll, and the scent of moon incense, faint but unmistakable, clinging to her clothes like a fingerprint left on purpose. "A message from the Grand Matron," the attendant announced. "Leora Ashvani is summoned to Moonspire for verification and ceremonial resolution. Lady Seraphine Calloway has been recognized as provisional Luna candidate." A pause, precise as a blade. The court also reminds Lady Ashvane that the conditions of the return require the wolfkin to touch Moonspire ground before maturity. Time is not unlimited. The ticking clock that Leora had pushed to the back of her mind surged forward. 9 months. The wolfkin were growing. The deadline was real, and the court knew it. Thessaly's voice was soft and lethal. Ceremonial resolution. That is what people call it when they want to smile while they steal your autonomy. The attendant's gaze flicked nervously to Eventide, visible now at the clearing's edge. Her composure cracked just slightly. Wisp trotted forward, nipped gently at the attendant's hem, then let go. "A statement, rather than an attack. This is not your territory." The attendant jumped back. Shade moved in front of Leora's boots, posture low and steady. Through the bond, Leora felt it cold and clear. Boundary. Mine, not yours. Leora stood. Her voice came out calm in a way that cost her everything beneath the surface. "I will return to Moonspire. By my choice, not by summons." The attendant left quickly, her departure looking far more like retreat than authority. In the silence that followed, Kale turned to Leora. He did not beg her not to go. He did not order her to stay. He simply looked at her as if she were his equal and his heart and said nothing at all, because sometimes saying nothing was the bravest form of trust. Leora looked at the forest around her, at Thessaly, already calculating, at the wolfkin pressed against her legs, at Eventide, whose eyes held steady as a verdict. "I am going back," she said. Thessaly's eyebrows rose. "That is either extremely brave or extremely petty, and I support both." Leora's hand drifted to her belly. 3 pulses answered like a quiet drum. Pack chooses, Pack stands, Pack reclaims. "Not to beg," Leora continued, her voice finding a steadiness that surprised her. "Not to apologize, not to be measured." "Then why?" Kale asked, and his voice was rough with something he was trying very hard not to let become hope. Leora lifted her chin. "Because the moon answered me, and because I am done letting them call me empty." In the distance, faint but unmistakable, the bells of Moonspire began to ring, slow and deliberate, as if the castle itself had sensed that the woman it dismissed was about to come back with the moon at her shoulder and 3 wild hearts beating beside her own. And in Leora's belly, the wolfkin stirred, ember surging forward, shade holding steady, wisp sparking with defiance. 9 months was not forever, but it was enough. Enough to grow. Enough to heal. enough to become the woman who would walk back through those gates and make the court remember that the moon does not answer the loudest voice. It answers the truest heart. 9 months changed the hollow wood the way it changed Leora, quietly, steadily, without asking anyone's permission. Winter had softened into early spring, and the forest no longer smelled like sharp frost and escape. It smelled like damp earth, new leaves, and the clean, relentless truth of things that survived. Leora stood at the tree line where Moonspire's outer walls rose beyond the last stretch of pines, and she let herself feel the weight of that sight without flinching. The castle looked the same. She did not. Her cloak hung differently on her shoulders now, shaped by a body that carried a deep, unmistakable heaviness low in her abdomen. Life, not delicate, and storybook. Wolfkin life. 3 whelps bound by old magic, their instincts already braided into her bloodstream like a second pulse. Even before she reached for the bond, she felt them. Ember's energetic thrum nudging her forward, forward, forward like momentum had become a personality. Shade's reserved steadiness wrapping cool and watchful around her spine. Wisp's playful surge tasting like mischief and the absolute refusal to be appropriate. Leora pressed her palm to her belly. 3 impulses answered. Pack, home, territory, hungry. Thessaly adjusted the strap of her satchel beside her, eyes narrowed at the castle with the expression of a woman reviewing a restaurant she intended to shut down. All right, we do this clean. We do this calm. And if anyone says something smug, I will smile politely while imagining them as a decorative lamp. Leora glanced at her. A lamp? Lamps are useful, Thessaly said. It is the highest compliment I can offer certain people. Behind them, Eventide waited like a quiet verdict. Bigger now. Still not the kind of colossal creature that blocked out the sky, but large enough that its presence bent the world around it. Scales holding that same dusk to silver gleam, eyes bright with ancient patience. When it blinked, Leora felt the familiar pressure settle into her bones. Truth, seat, return. Kale stood a few steps away, giving her space the way he had learned to, fluently, without making it feel like distance. He wore no crown. He had brought no banners. His hands were visible at his sides, and his scent carried on the morning air, storm dark threaded with that warmth underneath that no longer made Leora's chest ache in pure pain. It ached in something more complicated now, something that had room for both the wound and the healing. You do not have to do this today, he said quietly. Leora kept her gaze on the castle walls. If I do not do it today, they will choose the day for me. The walk up the main road felt longer than it used to, not because the distance had changed, but because Leora's senses were awake in ways they had never been inside these walls. Every scent carried meaning. Every sound arrived with depth. Even the cobblestones under her boots felt like memory. Cold stone that had once held her humiliation and would now hold her return. At the gate, 2 sentries stiffened. One opened his mouth, caught sight of Eventide's silhouette rising behind Leora against the morning sky, and promptly decided that silence was the most dignified option available. The other bowed so fast he nearly collided with his own knees. Thessaly leaned in. I love it when people rediscover manners. Inside the courtyard, the world paused. Servants froze mid-step. Courtiers turned too quickly and then pretended they had not. A ripple moved through the space, not fear exactly, but astonishment dressed up as composure and failing at it. 3 pulses inside Leora's belly. Pack alertness, a quick flare of hunger. and Shade's reserved steady coolness spreading through her like armor she did not have to carry because it carried itself. They reached the great doors. The scent hit Leora the moment they opened. Moon incense. Her throat tightened with a memory so sharp it nearly buckled her stride, but only nearly. Thessaly's voice arrived at her ear, soft and lethal. Ah, the smell of tradition pretending it is holy. The ceremonial hall had been prepared again. Of course it had. The court did not know how to exist without staging itself. Torches gilded carved stone and polished banners. 300 courtiers stood in neat arcs, faces arranged into expressions of ritual interest that Leora could now see for exactly what they were. Performance. Every single one of them performing. And there, near the dais, dressed in pale silver that caught every flame, stood Seraphine Calloway. Beautiful, polished, smiling as if she were already practicing for her portrait. Seraphine's gaze found Leora's belly first, then her face, the smile sharpened by a fraction. "Lady Leora," she said, voice carrying just enough sweetness to taste like poison. "You look well." Thessaly's whisper landed at Leora's ear. "If I had a coin for every time a woman said, 'You look well,' like it was a threat, I would own this castle and turn it into a library." Kale stepped to Leora's side, not in front, not behind. Beside. Seraphine's eyes slid to him. "Your Majesty," she purred. "I am relieved you have returned. The court has been unsettled." Kale did not look at her. "Do not," he said. One word followed by another, quiet as falling snow, and twice as final. Seraphine's breath caught. The smile held, but something behind it fissured. Grand Matron Irevia entered the hall the way she always did, as if the entire world existed to receive her, staff in hand, gaze landing on Leora with the practiced efficiency of someone appraising furniture. Her eyes paused on Leora's belly, and there was satisfaction in them, disguised as solemnity. "Leora Ashvane, you return under summons." Leora stepped forward. She did not lower her head. "I return by choice." A murmur rippled through the court. Irevia's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened on her staff by a fraction that Leora would not have noticed 9 months ago. She noticed everything now. The bond had taught her to read bodies the way wolves read them, through tension and scent, and the small, involuntary shifts that language tried to hide. Thessaly cleared her throat with the exaggerated politeness of someone about to commit an act of social destruction. "As court apothecary," she announced, voice carrying to every corner, "I will confirm the purity of the moon water before verification proceeds." Irevia's gaze snapped to her. "That is not required." Thessaly smiled as if she had been complimented. "Oh, I know. That is why I am doing it." She stepped forward and with maddening calm uncorked a small vial she had carried from the hollow wood. A scent like rain on stone spilled into the air. She tipped one drop into the silver bowl. The moon water shivered. Then it changed. A faint haze rose from the surface, thin and smoky, unmistakable, the ghost of something that had been hiding in plain sight, dragged into the light against its will. The court leaned forward. Irevia's face remained composed, but something in her eyes tightened a fraction too fast to be innocent. Thessaly's voice became silk over steel. "Well, would you look at that?" Leora approached the bowl. She raised her hand above the water without flinching. The surface warmed beneath her palm, and the hall seemed to tilt as if the moon itself had leaned closer to watch. 3 pale, crescent-shaped ripples formed on the surface. 3 distinct shapes. Undeniable. Whispers erupted. Irevia's voice cut through. "The return. Recognized. The words sounded as if they were being torn from her. Then Erivia lifted her staff and struck it once against the stone. The crack silenced the hall. Verification is only the first step. The return must be bound to the throne by vow, and the vow demands a renunciation. Her gaze found Leora with the precision of a blade finding a gap in armor. To reclaim the throne, you must renounce personal claim upon the king. You will speak the words before witness and moon. You will renounce him. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt physical. Leora's breath stopped, not because she did not understand the strategy, because it was crueler than she had prepared for. Make her choose between power and love. Make her kneel no matter which direction she turned. Make her break herself so the court could call it balance. Seraphine's eyes brightened with quiet triumph. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment the court's machinery would grind Leora into a shape that no longer threatened her position. Kale's voice came out like gravel. No. Erivia did not blink. It is not yours to refuse, Your Majesty. Kale turned to Leora. In that glance, he put every choice back where it belonged, with her. He did not beg. He did not command. He simply looked at her as if he trusted her to be stronger than the trap they had built around her. Then he turned back to the court. If you require her to renounce me, he said, and his voice carried with the calm force of a man who had finally stopped choosing between his crown and his conscience. Then I renounce the throne. The court erupted. Murmurs became gasps. Gasps became open shock. Seraphine's mouth fell open, and for the first time since Leora had known her, the performance dropped completely from her face, revealing something raw underneath. Fear. Erevia's composure cracked just enough to show the fury beneath. You cannot. Kale held her gaze. Watch me. Erivia recovered faster than any of them expected. Her spine straightened. Her voice sharpened into something that sounded less like ceremony and more like a weapon being unsheathed. Then we invoke the claws of solitude, she declared, each word placed with surgical precision. The return bearer will enter the hollow stone chamber alone. She will speak the renunciation as the stone demands. No one may follow. No one may interfere. If the vow is not accepted before the moon sets tonight, the return is forfeited. Her eyes locked onto Leora's. Permanently. Your wolfkin will never touch Moonspire ground as recognized pack. Your claim dies at dawn. The ticking clock that had been counting down for 9 months suddenly compressed into a single night. Hours. That was all Leora had. Hours before the deadline collapsed and everything she had carried and grown and survived became legally invisible. Kale's face went hard. You are trying to isolate her. Erivia's smile was thin enough to cut. I am obeying the accord. Thessaly's voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. You are obeying your fear. Leora felt the bond surge. Shade's caution pressing firm against her spine. Ember's insistence driving forward like a heartbeat shouting move. Wisp's defiance sparking hot, daring her, daring the room, daring the stone itself. She looked at Kale. He did not beg her not to go. He did not order her to stay. He looked at her as if she was his equal and his heart. And that look asked one thing without speaking it. Are you sure? Leora nodded once. Thessaly grabbed her hand. Brief, firm, grounding. If the stone tries to take your dignity, she whispered, eyes bright, tell it I already stole that back for you. Leora exhaled a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. Thank you. Go, Thessaly said, and come back meaner. Leora placed her palm on the chamber door. The stone warmed beneath her touch. The door opened with a sound like a held breath releasing. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a finality that pressed against her eardrums like the last sound before silence remembers it owns everything. The chamber was dim. A single shaft of moonlight fell from a high slit window, painting a pale stripe across the floor that ended at the base of the hollow stone. The air smelled like old rock and something deeper, as if memory itself had a scent, dusty and patient and impossibly heavy. 3 grooves waited in the stone's surface, the same grooves that had glowed for her 9 months ago, the same grooves that had started everything. Leora took a slow step forward. The bond pulsed inside her, tight and anxious now. 3 small surges of instinct braided together, hunger, fear, loyalty, all pressing toward a single urgent need: stay. Leora pressed her palm to the stone. Warmth bloomed, and then the stone answered, not with words, with a demand that arrived as sensation so sharp it stole her breath completely. Give. The demand did not arrive as sound. It arrived as gravity in her bones, as pressure behind her eyes, as the sudden, terrifying sensation of something precious being loosened inside her mind like a ribbon slipping from a knot. Give. Leora's hand trembled against the warm stone. Her breath came fast and shallow, filling the small chamber with the sound of a woman trying to hold herself together by will alone. Then Kale's voice began to fade. Not all at once, not like a door slamming, like fog rolling in over a landscape she had memorized. His quiet Leora from the tree line in the hollowwood, the one spoken with restraint and warmth, and the deliberate tenderness of a man who had learned that gentleness was braver than command. That voice thinned at the edges, the exact tone blurred. The warmth behind it cooled, not gone, but retreating, as if the stone was reaching into her chest and pulling the thread that connected his voice to her heartbeat. No, Leora whispered, and the words scraped her throat raw. Not him. The stone pulsed, slow, patient, infinite. Give. She tried to picture his eyes. The exact shade, storm dark with warmth banked underneath like embers behind stone. The image flickered. The color faded at the edges, the way a dream fades in the first seconds of waking. Present, but already unreachable. Already sliding toward a place where memory becomes impression, and impression becomes loss. Leora's knees threatened to buckle. She tightened her grip on the stone's edge with her free hand, anchoring herself against the pull. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "What do you want?" she whispered to the stone. Not a challenge. A plea. "Tell me." The stone answered, not with words, with memory. The ceremonial hall, pale stone beneath her feet, moon incense thick as smoke, 300 faces arranged in a half-circle of judgment, and at the center of it all, Erivia's voice ringing with the clean authority of someone who had never doubted her right to define another woman's worth. No spark of continuation. The humiliation rose inside Leora like a wave she had been running from for 9 months. It did not crash. It swelled, slowly, filling every space she had tried to keep dry, the way the courtiers had leaned forward when the water refused to glow. The whisper that floated through the hall like weather. She is empty. The heat that rushed to her face and then drained away, leaving her skin too tight, too exposed. A woman standing in white silk while the world decided she was defective. Leora's chest constricted so hard she nearly folded over the stone, and she understood. The stone was not stealing at random. It was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. It was testing, the same way fire tests metal, not to destroy, but to reveal what survives. The court had tried to bind her with vows and bowls and witnesses, with pretty words that meant cage. The stone, older than the court, older than their ceremonies, older than every law they had written to keep women small, did not care about their approval. It cared about choice. If Leora returned to Moonspire with her heart chained to fear, fear of being called empty again, fear of losing love, fear of not being believed, then she would rule from that fear. She would become a careful queen, a quiet queen, a queen who apologized before she spoke and listened for disapproval in every silence, and shaped herself around other people's expectations until the woman inside disappeared entirely. The stone would not allow that. A throne built on shame would crack. A queen built on someone else's judgment would hollow from the inside until there was nothing left but performance. The stone did not want Kale. It did not want love. It wanted the poison. The specific, precise, devastating poison that the court had poured into Leora on the night they called her empty, and she had believed them. Give. Leora's breath shook. Tears ran hot down her cheeks, and she did not wipe them because her hands were full of stone and survival and the effort of not collapsing. Then she felt them. 3 small surges of instinct pressing against her from the inside like living hands reaching through the bond to hold her upright. Ember first, bright and insistent, and so urgently alive it burned. Move, move, move. Do not freeze. Do not stop. Forward, always forward. Shade second, cool and steady as deep water. Hold, anchor, breathe. You are the center. The center does not move. Wisp third, sharp and defiant and impossibly brave for something so small. Bite first, make the world blink. If you do not like the game, change the rules. A sound came from behind her. Soft, unmistakable, the shuffle of paws on stone. Leora turned her head just enough to see them. 3 moon whelps slipped into the chamber like moonlight with feet. They did not enter the way humans would, timid and uncertain. They entered like wolfkin, low, alert, honest. The bond had not been stopped by a locked door because the bond did not recognize the authority of doors. Ember bounced once, tail wagging too fast for its body, and pressed its small warm form against Leora's ankle. The contact was immediate and total. Stay. I am here. You are not alone. Shade leaned against Leora's calf with quiet intention, placing its weight there like a promise made with the body instead of the mouth. Steady. I will hold you. For as long as you need. Wisp trotted right up to the hollow stone itself, sat down in front of it, and sneezed directly at the ancient relic as if it had personally offended every generation of wolfkin that had ever lived. Leora's laugh broke out of her like a sob, broken and beautiful and completely involuntary, the sound of a woman who had been drowning, discovering that her feet could still touch the bottom. She looked down at them, 3 creatures who did not understand politics or ceremonies or the word empty. 3 creatures who understood warmth and hunger and loyalty and the absolute, non-negotiable truth of pack. They had chosen her, not because she was powerful, not because she was approved, because she was theirs. And in that moment, with wolfkin pressed against her legs and tears cooling on her cheeks and the stone pulsing beneath her palm, Leora understood what she needed to give. Not him, not love, not the memory of being seen, the humiliation, the shame that had lived inside her like a second heartbeat ever since the night they called her empty, the voice in her head that repeated their judgment, the flinch she carried in her spine when someone looked at her too long, the way she listened for disapproval in every silence, the way she had shaped herself around the absence of their approval until the shape became a cage she could not see because she was standing inside it. That was the poison, and the stone was offering to take it. Leora closed her eyes, not to escape, to decide. "I will not give you him," she said, and the words came out like iron cooling into its final form. "I will not give you love or the memory of being seen, because that is not weakness. That has never been weakness." The stone pulsed, steady, listening. Leora pressed her palm harder against the warm surface. "But I will give you this." The memory of the hall sharpened inside her, whispers slicing, eyes weighing, shame burning through silk until her skin felt like it was on fire. She felt her body want to curl around that pain and keep it, the way you keep a wound covered because uncovering it means admitting it is real. She forced herself to breathe, forced herself to choose. "I renounce the humiliation," Leora said. "I renounce the need for their approval. I renounce the voice in my head that repeats their judgment. I renounce the word empty as if it ever belonged to me." The stone flared. Pale light filled the 3 grooves, and Leora gasped as the memory pulled free. Fast, clean, startlingly gentle, not ripped away, but lifted out, the way you lift a thorn from skin when you finally stop being afraid of the moment of removal. For a heartbeat, she panicked. The memory was still there, still real, still a fact of her story. But the burn was gone. The brand was gone. The way it had shaped her posture and her breathing and her ability to trust silence was gone. It felt like a scar that no longer ached when the weather changed. Present but powerless. Hers but no longer in charge. Shade pressed closer. Wait. Steady. A cool calm flowed through the bond. Ember yipped softly. Warm and insistent. Live. 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 Wisp bumped its head against Leora's boot, and the bond flashed with something that felt like irreverent confidence. "You are bigger than this. You have always been bigger than this." Leora's breath steadied, and then Kale's voice snapped back into her mind. Not fading, not thinning. Alive and clear and firmly tied to her heart like a thread that had never actually been cut, only tested. Leora, her name spoken in the hollow wood with restraint and warmth and choice. The tears that fell now were different. They did not burn. They cleared. The stone warmed one final time beneath her palm and showed her something that was not memory, but truth. The return was not punishment. The wolfkin were not proof for the court's comfort. They were pack. They were her tether to instinct and truth, placed in her life so she would never again mistake ceremony for love. And the crown scale, eventide, truth in scales, was not her weapon. It was the throne's conscience. A sound at the doorway. The dragon stood there, silent as a vow, eyes bright with steady pressure. It had entered because it was not subject to the rules of a court it did not serve. The crown scale belonged to the rightful seat, not to the grand matron, not to tradition, to truth. "Eventide," Leora murmured. "Guardian." The dragon blinked slowly. "Acceptance." Leora lifted her hand from the stone. The pale light in the grooves dimmed but did not extinguish. 3 lines of proof that would not be erased by anyone's denial. She turned toward the door. The wolfkin fell into step at her feet. Ember at her right. Shade at her left. Wisp slightly ahead, because Wisp would always go first into any room as a matter of personal principle. Leora stepped out of the chamber. The hall hit her with sound and scent, and the weight of 300 watching faces. moon incense, torch smoke, stone and silk, and the sharp undercurrent of fear, because the court could smell change coming the way animals smell storms, and they were not sure yet whether to run or submit. Kyle stood where he had been forced to wait, jaw clenched, eyes storm dark. The moment he saw Leora, something in his posture loosened. Not completely, just enough. The exhale of a man who had been holding himself together by will alone and had just been given a reason to believe the holding was worth it. Thessaly was near him, arms crossed, expression sharp enough to perform surgery. When Leora appeared, Thessaly's eyes flicked over her face the way a healer reads a patient after crisis, searching for collapse, finding something else instead. Leora gave the smallest nod. Thessaly exhaled once. Thank the moon, I was one dramatic speech away from committing a felony against decorum. Irivia stepped forward, staff in hand. Did the stone accept the renunciation? Leora held the Grand Matron's gaze. She felt no tremor of shame rise to meet it. Only clarity, clear as water that had never been tampered with. Yes. Irivia's eyes sharpened. Then speak the words. Renounce personal claim upon the king. A hush spread through the hall like frost across glass. Seraphine's smile trembled on the edge of her mouth, hopeful and hungry. Kale stood beside Leora without moving, without protesting, without trying to control her answer. He simply stood there with every ounce of restraint he had learned. Leora looked at him. Then she looked at the court, and she smiled, small, calm, lethal in its serenity. I already spoke, Leora said softly. Irevia's face tightened. You. The stone demanded a price, Leora continued, her voice even and carrying to every corner. And I paid it. By choice. Thessaly's grin flashed like a blade. By choice, she echoed, savoring the words. Irivia's composure held, but only barely. Then what did you renounce? Leora's fingers curled at her sides. Through the bond, three instincts rose like a tide. Steady. Loyal, unafraid. I renounced the humiliation you used to control me, Leora said. I renounced the need for your approval. I renounced the fear you planted. Confused murmurs spread through the court. Irivia's lips parted. That is not... Leora turned her head toward Eventide. Eventide, she murmured. The crowned scale stepped forward. One slow step. No threat, no spectacle, just presence. The weight of truth pressing down on the hall until lies had nowhere left to stand and nowhere left to hide. The moon water bowl on the dais shivered. A thin, smoky haze rose from its surface, stronger now than when Thessaly had first tested it. The moon salt reacted under true moonrise, as if the moon itself had caught the scent of dishonesty and decided to make it visible. Kyle turned to Irivia. His voice came out low and final, stripped of diplomacy, stripped of patience, stripped of everything except the raw sound of a man who had just watched the foundation of his trust collapse. You poisoned the verification. Irivia's composure cracked, not slowly. All at once, the way ice cracks when the weight on it finally exceeds what it can bear. For the stability of the crown, she snapped, and the confession landed in the hall like a mask dropping from a face everyone thought they knew. For decades, I have protected this throne from unpredictable sentiment. Thessaly's laugh was cold and precise. Translation: you protected your control. Irivia's eyes flashed with something that was no longer authority. It was fear. The specific fear of someone who had confused reverence with power and was only now realizing they were not the same thing. A Luna with too much feeling is dangerous, Irivia hissed, A king who chooses love over order is a vulnerability. Kale stepped forward. You feared a queen who could not be owned. The words landed and the hall felt them. 300 courtiers who had spent their lives bowing to Arevia's certainty suddenly saw the certainty for what it was. Not wisdom, control, not protection, possession. Seraphine moved then, too quickly, her silver gown catching torchlight. This is manipulation, she said, voice rising, grasping for purchase. She has bewitched you. She brought beasts into the hall. Thessaly tilted her head with the gentle patience of someone addressing a small child who had just said something spectacularly incorrect. Lady Seraphine, if you call them beasts again, I will introduce you to a jar of itching powder that will change your personality. Seraphine went red. I did nothing wrong. Leora looked at her, calm, clear, without hatred, but without mercy either. Did you know, she asked, about the moon water? Seraphine's jaw tightened. Her eyes slid away, then down, then to the side, everywhere except Leora's face. That was answer enough. Thessaly whispered, triumphant and terrible. Oh, she knew. Kyle's gaze settled on Seraphine with a disappointment so clean and complete that it looked like closing a book for the last time. Leave, he said. Seraphine's breath hitched. Your Majesty. Leave Moonspire, Kale corrected. You will not serve in this court. Not now. Not ever. Seraphine's face hardened. For a heartbeat, Leora expected one last performance, one last appeal to sympathy or outrage, or the court's appetite for drama. Instead, Seraphine lifted her chin, rage polished into the shape of dignity. Very well, she said through clenched teeth. Enjoy your chaos. She turned and walked toward the great doors, heels sharp on stone, spine straight, refusing to look back with the fierce discipline of someone who understood that looking back meant breaking. And as she passed through a shaft of torchlight near the exit, Leora saw it. Not the rage she expected, not the performance, something rawer, something that flickered across Seraphine's face for only a second before vanishing. Fear. The specific inherited fear of a woman watching herself become her mother. Through the bond, Leora felt an impression she did not expect. Not from herself, from the wolfkin. Shade, cool and measured, sending something that was not anger and not sympathy, but something in between. Recognition. The recognition that damage creates damage. That hurt people build weapons out of their wounds and call it ambition. Leora let Seraphine go. Not with forgiveness, not yet, but without hatred. Because hatred was another cage, and Leora had just freed herself from the last one. In the crowd, a small face caught Leora's eye. Marin, the young servant girl from the morning before the ceremony. She stood near the back of the hall, half hidden behind a taller courtier, and in her hand she clutched a handkerchief embroidered with small white flowers. The same handkerchief Leora had given her 9 months ago. Marin's eyes were wide and bright and fierce. She looked at Leora the way a person looks at proof. Proof that kindness was not weakness. Proof that being gentle did not mean being defeated. Proof that a woman could be broken in this exact hall and walk back into it whole. Leora's throat tightened. She did not nod. She did not need to. The recognition between them was older than ceremony and did not require witnesses. Arevia drew herself up, clutching her staff as if it could restore what she had already lost. You cannot remove me, she declared, but the ringing authority in her voice had thinned. I am the keeper of the accord. Eventide's eyes held hers. Truth pressed down. Irivia's words sounded smaller with every second they hung in the air. Leora stepped forward. The wolfkin aligned at her feet like a living crest, ember vibrating with energy, shade low and steady, wisp sitting with the composure of a creature that believed every room it entered was lucky to have it. "You kept the accord," Leora said, "but you broke its spirit." Irivia's gaze flicked to Leora's belly. "The return is unstable. It will unmake your rule." Leora smiled softly. "No," she replied. "It remade me." Kale moved to stand beside her, not as a shield, as a witness, as an equal. "Grand Matron," he said, voice carrying to every corner, "you are relieved of your office." Irivia's face twisted. "By what authority?" Kyle did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "By the authority you tried to control." He nodded once toward Eventide. The dragon exhaled, soft as snow falling. The torches flickered and the hall accepted a new reality in one long, shivering breath. "You will be confined to the archive cloister," Kale continued, "stripped of staff and title. You will spend the rest of your days recording the laws you abused, so no one forgets how easily reverence becomes control." Irivia's eyes widened. "That is humiliation." Leora's voice was calm. "No, it is consequence." The Grand Matron was led away, not dragged, not harmed, but removed with the quiet finality of a door closing on a room that had been locked for too long. And then Kale turned to Leora. The court's faces blurred. The torches became background. The incense faded. All Leora could feel was his scent, storm, and warmth, and 3 steady pulses inside her like pack heartbeats, reminding her to stay upright. Kale's voice dropped to something that was not public, something that was only for her and for the space between them. "Leora, I am sorry." He did not justify. He did not blame the court. He did not hide behind tradition or necessity, or the weight of a crown that had pressed him into a shape he was still learning to undo. He simply stood there and let the apology exist, late, necessary, real. Leora's throat tightened so hard it hurt. "You broke me in that hall," she said, and her voice did not accuse. It named. "And I had to rebuild myself in the forest." Kale's eyes glistened. He did not look away. "I know." A breath passed between them that contained 9 months of distance and every mile of the road back. "I forgive you," Leora said. The word trembled on her tongue like it weighed more than any crown she would ever wear. "Not because it did not matter, because you came back and learned, because you stood beside me, because you chose me even when it cost you." Kyle's breath broke. A small sound. The sound of a wall coming down inside a man who had been holding it up for so long he had forgotten what the other side looked like. Then he did something the court had never seen an Alpha King do. He knelt, one knee on the pale stone where Leora had been humiliated 9 months ago. Not a ceremonial kneel, not a performance for 300 witnesses. A choice, made with his entire body, in front of every person who had ever believed that power only flowed downward. "I am sorry," he said again, and this time the words were not just for the rejection. They were for every moment after. Every day he sat on the throne, knowing she was in the forest. Every night he stared at the empty balcony where her scent still lingered. Every hour he failed to be the man she needed him to be. "I am sorry for what this hall did to you while I held the authority to stop it. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking you to let me stand beside the woman you became, not the woman I remember, the one you built in the dark with your own hands." The hall was so silent, Leora could hear her own pulse. 3 wolfkin pressed against her legs. Through the bond, she felt it. Warmth, loyalty, and from Wisp, a spark of something that felt suspiciously like approval, as if the playful wolfkin had just decided that the king was adequate. Leora reached down and touched Kale's shoulder. His body trembled once under her fingers. Just once. The tremor of a man who had been afraid that this moment would never arrive. "Stand up," Leora said quietly. "I do not need you on your knees. I need you beside me." Kale rose. His eyes were wet, and he did not hide it, did not blink it away, did not perform composure for the court. He simply looked at her with everything he had, and everything he had was finally, fully, honestly hers. "On my terms," Leora whispered. "Always," Kale answered. Thessaly, standing 3 feet away with her arms crossed and her jaw tight and her eyes suspiciously bright, muttered under her breath, "Finally. If you two took any longer, I was going to age into a bitter legend." A laugh rippled through the hall. Small, shocked, human. The first honest sound those walls had heard in decades. Leora turned and looked at the throne. The seat looked the same, but it did not feel the same. She walked toward it, eventide at her shoulder, wolfkin at her feet, every step measured and deliberate and entirely her own. She placed her palm against the armrest, wood, worn smooth by generations, and the castle responded like something waking from a long and restless sleep, a shiver through the stone, a settling in the air, the feeling of a structure recognizing its rightful occupant not through blood or ceremony, but through the weight of truth. Leora sat, not in white, not trembling, not begging. She sat with eventide settling at the foot of the dais, wings tucked, eyes half-lidded, the quiet guardian of legitimacy who would remain as long as truth needed a sentinel and leave when it did not, and return when it did again. Never owned. Always present. Kale sat beside her. Equal distance from the center. Equal weight on the seat. Not above. Not in front. Beside. "From this moonrise forward," Kale declared, his voice carrying clear and strong, "the throne is not held by one. It is held by two who choose each other, and by a court that serves, not controls." Leora looked out at the 300 faces that had watched her break and were now watching her rebuild, and said, with a calm that felt earned rather than performed, "There will be a new order of service. Ceremonies will be witnessed by healers as well as elders. Moonwater will be prepared under open sight, and Thessaly Briarwick will be its keeper." Thessaly's eyes went wide. "Oh, absolutely not." Leora raised one brow. Thessaly's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then she muttered with the resignation of someone who had just been outmaneuvered by fate itself, "Fine, but I am spelling my name correctly on the plaque, and I want the herb budget doubled." The hall laughed, freely, openly, as if the court had suddenly remembered that it was allowed to breathe. And on the pale stone at the center of the hall, in the place where a woman in white had once been told she was empty, 3 faint lines of light still glowed in the hollow stone, quiet as embers, stubborn as truth. Proof that the moon does not answer the loudest voice. It answers the one that refused to stop beating. Months later, Moonspire smelled like a place where people actually lived. Not the sterile perfume of ceremony, not the suffocating weight of moon incense pressed into every corridor like a warning dressed as worship. The halls smelled like fresh bread rising from the kitchens, clean herbs drifting from Thessaly's expanded apothecary on the 2nd floor, and the crisp, honest air that came through windows no one bothered to keep shut anymore. Leora noticed it most in the mornings. She would wake before the castle stirred, when the light was still gray and soft, and the stone walls held the quiet of a world that had not yet decided what kind of day it would be. She would lie still for a moment, eyes closed, feeling the bond hum through her body like a river she no longer had to swim against. It simply flowed, steady, permanent. 3 distinct currents braided into her awareness so deeply now that she could not remember what silence had felt like before them. Ember's current ran warm and fast, always pushing forward, always hungry for the next thing. Even in the early hours, the impression arrived like a pulse of golden heat, awake, ready. Where are we going? Shade's current ran cool and deep, watchful even at rest, scanning the perimeters of Leora's awareness the way a sentinel scans the tree line at dawn. Not anxious, attentive. The steady reassurance of a presence that had decided long ago that vigilance was its form of love. Wisp's current sparked and tumbled, irregular as laughter, carrying impressions that ranged from smug satisfaction to bold curiosity, to the sudden intense conviction that something across the room needed to be investigated immediately by teeth. Leora pressed her palm over her heart and felt all 3 answer, not in words, never in words, in the language they had always spoken. Sensation, instinct, truth. She rose, dressed simply, and walked to the balcony. Below, the courtyard caught the first real light of morning, and 3 young moonwolves raced across the open stone in a loose spiral that looked less like exercise and more like pure joy translated into motion. They were not pups anymore. 9 months of growing had stretched them into sleek young wolves, with silver-edged fur that caught sunlight the way their smaller bodies had once caught moonlight. Their paws no longer looked too big for their frames. Their movement had shifted from clumsy enthusiasm to something graceful and deliberate, though each carried that grace differently. Ember ran like lightning, made a decision to become a wolf, and did not entirely understand the concept of slowing down. Every stride was full commitment, full speed, full belief that whatever was ahead was worth reaching at maximum velocity. Leora watched and felt the bond flood with exhilaration so pure it made her smile before she realized she was doing it. Shade moved along the courtyard's edge with careful watchfulness, tracking the perimeter the way Shade tracked everything, thoroughly and without fanfare. Every few strides, the wolf paused and turned its head, scanning, assessing, confirming that the territory was secure and that Leora was still visible on the balcony above. The bond carried a quiet, satisfied pulse each time their eyes met across the distance. Confirmed. Safe. Continuing. Wisp stopped mid-run to pounce dramatically on absolutely nothing. A shadow. A leaf. An insult that existed only in Wisp's imagination. The wolf held the pose for a theatrical moment, tail high, ears pricked, then trotted onward with the self-assured swagger of a creature that believed the entire courtyard was fortunate to witness its performance. Thessaly stood on the steps below, hands on hips, hair slightly less perfect than her public reputation required, watching the wolves with an expression that balanced exasperation and something she would deny to her grave. "If any of you chew my new shelves," she shouted across the courtyard, "I will become your villain origin story." Wisp's ear flicked in her direction. The bond carried a spark of delighted defiance. Noted. Will consider. Thessaly pointed one finger. "I saw that ear. Do not test me. I have powders that would make your fur itch for a calendar year." Leora laughed softly from the balcony, and the sound carried down through the morning air with an ease that still surprised her. Laughter had not come easily in this castle once. It came easily now, not because pain had disappeared, but because pain had been given its proper place, present but no longer in charge, a fact of the story rather than the author of it. At the courtyard's far edge, Eventide lay like a sculpture made of dusk and breathing. The dragon had grown into something that could no longer be called small by any honest measure. Its body curved along the stone wall with the relaxed authority of a creature that understood its own significance and felt no need to advertise it. Scales shifted through gradients of twilight and silver as the morning light moved across them, and when the sun touched its face, Eventide opened one eye with the slow deliberation of something that had been watching the world for longer than the world had been watching back. The dragon lifted its head only when Leora appeared on the balcony. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and the familiar pressure settled into Leora's bones with the gentle weight of a truth that did not need to shout. Guardian, witness, conscience of the throne. Eventide would remain as long as truth needed a sentinel in Moonspire. It would leave when it did not. It would return when it did. It belonged to no one and served only the rightful seat, drawn to honesty, repelled by falsehood, present not by command, but by purpose. That had been the understanding from the first moment in the Hollowwood, and nothing that had happened since had changed it. Leora rested her hands on the balcony railing and breathed in the morning. Pine. She could still smell it on her skin some days, faint as a secret, carried from the forest that had sheltered her when the castle could not. She kept it the way she kept the memory of those first nights under the trees, not as a wound, but as a compass, a reminder of what she was capable of building when everything she had been given was taken away. In the archive cloister 3 floors below the main hall, Grand Matron Erevia sat at a desk surrounded by more books than company. Her hands were ink-stained. Her back ached from hours of writing in the precise, unforgiving script that the archive demanded. Around her, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes of law and precedent and ceremony that she had once wielded like weapons and now copied like pennants. On the wall facing her desk, a single line of text had been carved into the stone by order of the Queen. Reverence is not control. Erevia stared at it the way she stared at it every morning, with the complicated expression of a woman who understood the words intellectually but was still learning, slowly and against her will, what they meant in practice. There was no fury left in her face. Fury required energy, and the cloister had a way of converting energy into something quieter, not peace. Resignation was too generous. Clarity, perhaps. The bitter, useful kind that arrived only after the doors had closed and the audience had gone home. She picked up her pen and continued writing. Because the laws would not record themselves, and consequence, as someone had once told her, was not the same thing as humiliation. Far from Moonspire, in a small town that did not appear on any map the court bothered to maintain, Seraphine Calloway wiped down a wooden table in a roadside inn. Her silver gown was gone. Her carefully constructed smile was gone. Her hands, which had once been lotioned and perfumed and displayed like accessories, were chapped from soap and rough from work that did not care about bloodlines or beauty or the politics of who sat closest to power. She did not look broken. That was the thing Leora would have noticed if she had been there to see it. Seraphine looked different, quieter, less sharp at the edges, as if the sharpness had been something she maintained through constant effort, and without an audience there was no reason to keep the blade polished. On the table in front of her, open to a page marked with a folded napkin, sat a book on herbalism. Not a court text, not a strategy guide disguised as scholarship, a practical book about roots and leaves and the quiet science of healing things that were broken. Seraphine turned a page with fingers that did not tremble. She was learning something for the first time in her life that had nothing to do with climbing and nothing to do with survival and nothing to do with the fear of becoming her mother. She was learning something because she wanted to know it, because it interested her, because the woman she was building in the absence of ambition turned out to be someone who was curious about how things grew. It was not redemption. It was not a happy ending tied with ribbon. It was a beginning, small and unglamorous and entirely her own. On the balcony of Moonspire, Leora felt a presence at her shoulder and did not need to turn to know who it was. Kale's scent reached her first. Storm and warmth. Always storm and warmth. But there was something else in it now. Something that had not been there before the Hollowwood. A softness that came from learning. A steadiness that came from choosing, every single day, to stand beside instead of in front, to ask instead of assume, to hold open a door instead of walking through it first. His hand hovered near hers on the railing, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin, not touching, not claiming, simply there, present, ready to meet her if she reached. "Do you miss the forest?" Kale asked quietly. Leora watched the moonwolves below, ember chasing sunlight, shade guarding the edges, wisp sitting in the exact center of the courtyard as if it owned the deed. "Every day," she said, "not because I want to escape, because that is where I found myself." Kyle was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that held weight but did not press. "I am glad you found her," he said. "She is remarkable." Leora turned her head. He was looking at her with the expression she had learned to trust over these months. Not the storm-dark intensity of a king who wanted something, but the steady warmth of a man who already had everything he needed and knew it, and would spend the rest of his life being grateful without performing the gratitude for an audience. Leora reached across the small distance between them and took his hand. It was the first time in the entire story that she had reached for him. Every other touch had been his offering, his question, his hand extended for her to accept or refuse. This time, her fingers found his. Her palm pressed against his palm. Her grip tightened with the quiet certainty of a woman who was no longer afraid that wanting something meant losing herself in it. Kale's hand closed around hers, warm, steady, holding without squeezing, firm without claiming. The touch of a man who had learned that the strongest thing he could do with his hands was let them be gentle. They stood like that as the sun climbed higher and the courtyard filled with sounds of a castle waking up. Footsteps and voices and the distant clatter of the kitchen and the sharp, clear bark of a moonwolf who had just discovered that a broom leaning against a wall was a mortal enemy that needed to be subdued immediately. Thessaly's voice rang out. "Wisp, so help me. If you destroy one more piece of cleaning equipment, I am filing a formal complaint with the moon." Leora smiled. The expression felt like breathing, easy and involuntary and proof that she was alive. On the railing beside her free hand, a sealed letter sat where a messenger had left it earlier that morning. The crest was unfamiliar, belonging to a kingdom beyond Moonspire's borders, a place that had heard stories carried on trade routes and whispered across diplomatic tables, stories about a crown scale, about wolfkin, about a Luna who had been rejected and answered by the moon itself. They wanted to meet her. They wanted to understand what Moonspire had become. Leora had not opened the letter yet, but through the bond she felt the wolfkin's response to its presence. Shade's cool caution, assessing the unknown. Ember's warm curiosity, leaning toward the new. Wisp's defiant readiness, prepared for whatever came next. The world outside Moonspire was beginning to pay attention, and Leora, standing on the balcony with the man she had chosen beside her, with wolves she had raised running below her, with a dragon she had named breathing quietly at the edge of her kingdom, felt the bond hum its steady triple rhythm. 3 heartbeats. Permanent. Unbreakable. The living proof that what the court had called empty was, in fact, so full that it took a forest and a dragon and 3 wild souls to hold it all. Leora closed her eyes. The pine scent lingered on her skin. The sun warmed her face, and the bond pulsed. She did not need the moon to answer for her anymore. She was the answer.